So
All
sorry, what were
right.
you saying?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So this is generally the Monday days are my class. So for those that were in my class last term, Happy New Year's. Actually, to everyone, Happy New Year's. Wonderful to see you all. Very excited to work with you all. But today is a really special class because we have here joining us faculty from different, um, yeah, different faculties who are all going to introduce themselves individually when we get to it. But basically, I'm going to be passing it off to Steve in a second to kind of lead this kind of presentation. Uh, but feel free to ask questions in the chat, say hello. Just say hello to all your fellow peers and kind of go from there. But I guess without further ado, pass it off to Steve, and then we'll start a little presentation.
Yep. All right. Well, we're going to hand off control between the four of us anyway. So you've already met Mason. Hi, I'm Steve Engels. I'm the instructor for the U of T computer science portion of our collaboration. Should we do like quick intros for the rest?
Yeah, I'll introduce myself again. My name is Mason Victoria. I am the lecturer at U of T Music for game audio implementation, sound design, and composition. I'll pass it off to Emma.
My name is Dr. Emma Westcott. I teach game design and game studies at OCAD. Pleased to see you. And I'm part of the original crew with Dr. Steve Engels, who started off this course 11, 12 years ago.
I didn't introduce myself as Dr. Steve Engels.
No, you should do.
Why did I do like 5 years of this? Anyway. All right, Brent, do you want to say hi?
Oh. Hi, my name's Bryn Davis, not doctor, and I am not a lecturer either at the moment. I'm just, I work at USoft Toronto as technical director of level design.
So hi, yeah, between the four of us, we're going to be kind of your co-instructors for the next few months. Each of us kind of comes from a particular area, like the technical side, the music side, the art side of game design. And Bryn would be kind of our sort of industry person in residence, which is sort of a new cool thing we've been able to do this year. So every year we kind of try to add to the experience. So we hope all of you like it. All right, let's get to what this is about. So we'd like to do this thing at the beginning where we talk to everybody, because while we're going to talk to each of our individual classes in the days to come, we figured that there's stuff that's common to all of you, and we want you to recognize that this course is not like a bunch of individuals, but rather it's like a large collaboration between multiple different areas. So let's start off with having one session for everybody. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the course and what it's involved. We're talking about the project, which is the main thing, like the main crux of this collaboration. We'll talk about, our history with the course and what things have made for a successful group. And we'll talk a little bit then afterwards about, how are things like the technical side of the lectures and demos going to work. And with the time we've got at the end, we'll talk about sort of indie games, which is like the theme we've been going with for, oh gosh, as long as this collaboration has been taking place. One little thing to note is that we do have a form that we'd like you to fill out so that when we form groups over the next week or so, we have some of the knowledge of what kind of skills you bring so that we can create groups that have complementary skills. So please fill that out if you haven't already. Let's see, so what's the course about? So basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to make a fun game. And this is great. And it is ultimately what we are trying to get at the end of the course. What does this involve? Well, a lot of different things. Any one of these could go wrong and it can interfere with our main goal. So what we try to do in this course is try to hit all these different aspects. And I know sometimes people come into this course thinking, well, I wanted to make this course work. Like I want to learn about things like cell shaded animation. Well, that's great. But, as designers, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that the ultimate goal of making a good game is not impeded by any of these things that can sometimes, be missed in the act of trying to kind of, hit these smaller goals. So the big thing, I guess, about this is that in order to be able to make a good game, we're going to be starting off by like soliciting some ideas from everybody to try to pick the best ones. We're going to be giving you some feedback on the things that you're doing from as many sources as possible, and you're going to have to try to find ways of accepting this. There's going to be a lot of work involved, teamwork, planning, all these things we're going to try to teach you in order to try to help this course runs well. Interrupt me at any time if there's something that you think I'm missing. I'm going to just try to hit some of these major points early. This is an unheard of collaboration between not just different areas, but different campuses, right? As far as I know, there's almost no other course that joins multiple schools together, multiple disciplines into single groups. And everyone who has heard about this program, thinks it's just so unusual, but also so meaningful. So what we do is, all of our groups are going to be done in multidisciplinary teams. Historically, it's been about, teams of 8 with 3 U of T computer science, 3 digital futures, and 2 from the Faculty of Music, all of whom are contributing towards a single game. And we typically have around like 10 to 12 teams, depending on how many people are enrolled in our course by the time we form the groups. So we're going to put a lot of stress on making sure that you have the ability to communicate with people who are in an area that's completely different from you, but who are all working towards the same goal. So what that looks like is that each of you is going to be meeting up with the instructor for your course for most of this semester. And every 2 to 3 weeks or so, we'll be meeting in these multidisciplinary groups to be able to present the work you've been doing as a team before you go back and then learn about sort of the individual tech, art, and music from your instructor. Because it's multidisciplinary, we are not drawing boundaries in terms of what you're allowed to learn. So anyone who is not in computer science is welcome to attend my classes and learn about the things that I'm teaching. And likewise, anyone who is not in music or not in digital futures is invited to attend these so that you learn more than just what your transcript says you're supposed to learn. So that's basically how things work, is that, most of the time you meet and as part of your discipline, and then every 2 to 3 weeks, we present one of the milestones that, help you develop your game from idea to final product. And you present these things as a group in order to be able to get the feedback as like a single unified unit. And ultimately, we're going to have you launch these things on itch.io for the general community to be able to consume. How am I doing so far? Is there anything else you think I should add? Or all right.
Good so far.
Driving forward. So normally we would be doing this stuff in person, but because all of us are operating under some COVID constraints, this course is being done online for at least the immediate future. We don't know what the future is going to hold, but at least for U of T, we're being told no in-person classes are even being considered until February. And from the OKU point of view, classes aren't even starting until the 28th. We don't know what this is going to lead to, but right now, and for the foreseeable future, the course is being delivered online. What this means, anytime we're doing these presentations, when you meet as a group and present your progress, it's going to be done over Discord. Some of you have exposure to that already, some of you haven't. We'll be sending you the information if this is new to you. But Discord is going to be a platform where we're expecting you to not just be able to present stuff, but also to develop when you're not presenting, because it allows people to be able to communicate and collaborate together pretty nicely, and allows us to dip in if there's any point where you need our help. So we're going to be doing game jams over Discord. We're going to be doing presentations to our industry panel of experts over Discord. So that's going to be one of the major media for this course. The lectures that we have, sometimes Discord has some issues when it comes to managing large groups of attendees. So like often we'll end up doing our lectures over something else like Zoom. And to make sure that we are disseminating these lecture recordings in a way that all 3 campuses can see, we're putting it onto a special YouTube channel that we'll be sending you the link for. So basically, you'll be able to look there for all the lectures recorded from, U of T CS and music and digital features. They'll all be in this one place so that all campuses can see them. there's no other way for us to do it otherwise, because any other more secure way is usually restricted to one campus or another. And as we said, one of the differences for this year is that OCADU is actually starting on the 28th. So this is going to make the project interesting, and not interesting in a bad way, but interesting in a way that actually reflects kind of a subset of how games are developed in certain groups. Typically, especially in large companies, like the AAA studios, they'll actually assemble the tech teams and the music teams and the art teams at different stages in the life cycle. Because, when it comes to things like bring your art team, which ends up being about like 2/3 of your team by the end, most of that is brought in at the end. The tech team starts by developing the underlying infrastructure and the underlying sort of gray boxed version of the game. And then the art team is brought in force to be able to create, the overall look and feel. So since this is something that we have a model for in the real world, we're going to run for it with this course. U of T computer science and music are going to get things started. And we're going to, once we have like a basic game, like at least the underlying tech ready, then we introduce our digital features collaborators to help flesh out what, look and feel and like, yeah, those kinds of like the non-techie qualities for the game. And I'm probably not describing this in a way. Is there some way that you would describe it better than I am?
I think it might be worth making the point that the OCAD students come from across the university, so we've got a big range of different skills. I know it's the same with your students, Steve, in coming from different programs, but the types of skills you can expect from OCAD students range from illustration to graphic design to sort of 3D experimental animation. The digital futures student, which is my home program, tend to be more used to game engines and have had the fortune to spend some time in Unity. So they're a little bit more technically oriented than one might imagine from an art and design school.
Mm-hmm. So this is,
I just want to chime in for a second with the Discord as well, which is going to be really great because, again, usually during these kind of collaborations, we are physically able to kind of meet one another and collaborate and kind of see all of our work from the sidelines and get to meet people through these various means. And we want to make sure that this Discord is very community driven and it feels like we could all kind of communicate and interact with each other. And so you'll notice some things after we kind of talk about the Discord a little bit more, to kind of collaborate with others, not only within your game jam groups or your collaborative groups, but outside of that as well. But the one thing I wanted to ensure, and I'll mention this again during the game jam, I'll mention this whenever really it's necessary, but make sure that when you join the server, that you change your name to your first and last name. And that makes it easier for us for, number one, to mark your attendance, to make sure that you are there. And number two, make sure that we know that, we know who you are. Like if we see Banana Buddy 45 and we have no idea who we're talking to, then it'll cause some confusion. And so we want to make sure that that's all sorted out. And because of that, I've kind of set it up in the way that you will not receive access to the majority of the server channels until you actually have your first and last name, and it kind of cross-references with what we have in our student list, just to ensure that we have this space kind of specific for all of us as a community to work in and work together in. But yeah, that's all I had to say about that.
Yeah, it was hard when we were trying to create channels for individual groups when we had no idea who this person was. So yes, please label yourselves. All right, let's talk about the main project, right? The majority of the marks that you're going to get for your course, for this course, are coming from this collaborative project, because that's what this is. It's more of like a capstone type independent inquiry kind of project. So what we're trying to do is at the end of the course, we're going to have everybody, like every team is going to present their game to a group of industry experts who's going to provide us with feedback, which ultimately goes towards the final mark in your course. So no, we basically try to stay away from it because, we don't want you making a game for Emma or a game for Mason or a game for me. we want you to make a game for everybody. So we're basically saying, look, your target audience is going to be a bunch of people, a large group, and you have to be able to make a game that can appeal to this large group of people. So knowing that, our job is to basically help you along the path to get from starting off with some idea to reaching this ultimate goal. So how does this look? Well, what we do is we try to arrange this kind of in stages, right? We focus on the different processes or the different, major tentpoles in the development of a game. And so we start off with our creative brief at the beginning, which is where you describe, the pitch for your game, including, everything that's supposed to sell this game to maybe, the CEO of your company to, decide to greenlight it or not. The design document where you commit all the details of how your game's supposed to go. Again, this is something where people would put in, basically you should be able to play your game through this design document without having actually implemented a part of it. We'll go into more detail about these things as we get closer. The alpha release is supposed to be your first playable prototype where you can basically see the game as it's meant to be played, release a slice of it. The beta release is meant to be kind of your feature complete version of it. And then at the end, we have this, in between the beta release and the final demo, we have what's almost called like the tech and music complete demo, or so where basically the U of T music and computer science people have to be able to hand off, all the working parts, like tech and music wise, for the OCAD students to be able to complete. And then by the end of it, we do like a final demo in front of our audience of experts to be able to assess what mark you're going to get in the course. So you can see that this is basically how we're trying to lead you. We're going from one milestone to the next, and each time we complete one, we're trying to coach you on the skills you need in order to be able to achieve the next one, knowing that this is all going to lead you to a great game in the end.
So we have one question in chat. And the question is, do we know if the Level Up convention will be happening this year or not?
I think it's tough to think about that working in person. I think in the last couple of years, we've pushed quite hard to explore sort of online and remote ways of getting your games promoted into different types of sort of venues. So we do have some conversations with event partners coming up next week. But I doubt we're going to be in a situation to return back to a crowded venue with 2,000 people coming in over 6 hours. So we're looking at alternate plans, but Level Up in the way that it used to be, I think, is not going to be back this year.
So just for those of you who are new to the Level Up idea, this is something that, like, at least Emma and I have been at the head of since, was it like 2011? I think the first time we did it, where we basically brought all of the games that were made by game courses across Ontario into a single location for the general public and industry people to come by and take a look. It was great, but yeah, there's certain issues about being able to pull that off this year. If even just from a logistical point of view, we need more runway to be able to make this event happen than we currently have. It required so many sponsorships that it was more expensive and more work than like putting together my wedding every year. And so just based on the time we've been looking at figuring out how we take some of the sponsorships we got from groups like Ubisoft in order to make like what people are looking at now, which is, the online versions of these formerly in-person events. So yeah, we're doing the best we can under the circumstances that have been handed to us.
I'll kind of chime in as well and say that it's something that Steve will talk about in a brief moment, but we'll still be working with industry people throughout the process, and they'll be able to see your games, and ultimately you still will come out of this with a working game that you could use as a portfolio piece. And as someone that at one point was in this course who did not get to do Level Up, it still resulted in a fine portfolio piece that had kind of catapulted my ability to work in the industry as well. So yeah, it's not the be all end all coming to that convention. You'll have a lot to show after this class.
So just to get back to these milestones, so because we've been teaching this course for a while, what we found out is that when we left it at these milestones, people would have like periods of inactivity followed by intense periods of activity right before the demos. So as part of that, we also do other things to help fill in some of the gaps in the schedule. So the first thing we do at the very beginning is we do a game jam that's taking place this Saturday. And what we do is, because we need to get used to some of the tools and get used to working with each other, game jams are considered to be one of these events that takes place all the time, either like on a city or like a local or a global level, where people just come together and make a jam, they jam together a game in a short period of time, knowing that the short constraint helps them just kind of focus on getting something out, even if it's not pretty. It's about making something and then seeing how it is, and then, you know, maybe that game can evolve into something bigger later. So we have a couple of these, one that's taking place this coming weekend to kind of get people used to some of the tools, and one that comes up after our OCAD collaborators join us to integrate some of the art skills into what we've been kind of looking at we've been putting together on the tech side. We also have like smaller demos in between. So things like, we typically ask for like a basic level after you've done your your design document, just to kind of help articulate what your game might actually look like and get feedback on it. So before you actually show what your playable prototype is, you've had a chance to show us one level and, you know, get us to let you know what things are working, what things aren't. We also do playtesting after we do the playable prototypes, so that you get this in front of actual people, get them to try your game and get feedback from them. They're going to be your ultimate audience, so we want you to get that feedback early and often. And it usually culminates with a little virtual field trip to Ubisoft where they've given feedback to us about, you know, like after you manage to get rid of all the little bugs, they help you figure out the big bugs. So yeah, that's kind of what we try to do as part of this course. All this is going to be deployed onto your itch.io page. If you're not familiar with this, this is kind of it's a website where like indie developers in particular can post some of the work they do to a community that's both interested in trying it and, you know, developing their own. So a lot of the most successful indie games have started off as an itch page, and then, you know, kind of allow people to, you know, purchase their work or, you know, give feedback on it in a nice, you know, communal setting. So we're going to get you to do the same thing. You're going to put all of the different stages from your creative brief, your design document, your trailers, you know, your initial prototypes, and just have that history there so that we can see it, but also anyone who's interested in your work and your skills can also go and visit it, you know, as people in the community tend to do. Yep. So game jams, these things are where we basically, if we were in person, we would be sitting down in a room and just working together in little clusters for 6 hours, just to say, what can you make in 6 hours? Here, we're going to do the same thing over Discord. We're going to put you into groups, have you get a chance to work with each other and understand what it's like to work virtually, especially through something like Discord. Get all of those little kinks out so that you're ready to go as soon as the game jam is done. And we can kind of see what things you can make in 6 hours, which are really impressive when you look at it after the fact, and helps dispel this notion that these games are like these huge undertakings. You can do a lot in 6 hours. And if you can do a lot in 6 hours, imagine what you can do if you had like another week, right? So this is kind of what this exercise is meant to be. We would love to have everyone there. If you aren't, you have to provide some other assignment that's much more boring. Come out to the game jam, get a chance to meet each other, and work on something fun that gets you basically like an automatic 5% if you manage to come join us. And we have been part of game jams for a long time. But I don't know what kind of game jams, have you taken part in game jams in the past, or is this?
Have I done any game jams before?
Yeah.
You mean just with this course?
No, in general. Because I know
I jammed a while back, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's been a good couple of years. I've been meaning to jump back in at some point, but
right. So this is the thing. A lot of great games have kind of gotten their origins from game jams. And we've been part of some of the ones that have taken place in the past, like do you call it Toe Jam or TO Jam? Emma, is it?
Toe Jam.
Toe Jam, okay. So there's Toe Jam. The Royal Ontario Museum used to host a game jam that we were helping with. It's a fun activity, but also useful in terms of your personal development. Playtesting, well, this is again something we'll get into much more after, after we've got our first playable prototype done. But playtesting is the idea that ultimately your game is going to be evaluated by how fun it is to play. So the only way that you're going to be able to improve it is by putting it in front of people, seeing what they say, and fixing all the things that they point out. And we'll teach you a little bit about how that's going to work. But we make this part of the course that you have to do because it is vitally important. You cannot just have this thing, sequestered away and only released at the very end. You need to get this in front of people, right? Because that's ultimately what we're trying to do, create an experience for, some random audience. Okay, so that's all the stuff in terms of what we're getting you to do. Let's give you some of the, the wisdom of the past in terms of what makes people successful in this course. And, Mason, Emma, please jump in because I'm going to talk about things at a high level, but I'm going to miss a bunch of stuff. So make sure you let me know. Communication. Communication is, I would say, by far the most important thing, because all the games that have failed in the past have usually failed because of a lack of communication. Because one group member didn't let another group member know that they were doing the same. One person just basically disappeared for a little bit and didn't tell the other group members what happened. Somebody wanted a particular thing, didn't tell the other group member what they wanted, and so they end up working on different things. All the inefficiencies, all the acrimony, all of the, the missed opportunities were almost always a result of just like a communication issue. So this is one of those things where Bryn's offered to come and help talk about how this is done in industry in order to try to avoid these kinds of mishaps. But again, very glad to have him here as part of the course. So that's one part. Innovation. What we want is to see you make something very cool and different and new. There are a lot of very same games out there in the world. And often what happens is that people don't have the opportunity to take risks because you're working for a company that has particular goals in mind and you have to fulfill those goals. Game jams are great to be able to explore some of these things. But often what people like when they come to visit our course is they want to see what cool and strange and bizarre things our students have been able to come up with. Because we have the full range to fail in this course. You fail in this, I'm not saying like fail as in like get like less than 50%, but make a game that just doesn't work, right? But you try and you make interesting decisions and you get a chance to show people what happens if you try to make this new weird kind of game. And that is cool. That is the thing that excites people, to be able to see like what is the weirdest thing that they've seen. Like people come to our classes, they'll see some of the demos and they'll be like, what is the weirdest thing that I saw from today? And that's the thing that people will go away remembering. So we want you to be innovative. Do not make another first-person shooter. Do not make a first-person shooter at all. Make something that is cool and different and novel, because you have the freedom to explore that without any real consequences. Emma, do you have thoughts or?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that works really well with this game, with this sort of like format, is thinking about an interesting mechanic and using mechanic-led game design. Many people, games can come from many places. Ubisoft, for example, is famous for their wonderful open world design. I would say that you don't really have enough time to build a huge, great big open world in the context of this class. So making something that's smaller, that can be polished, makes the best sense for you having a compelling played experience. In the same way as story-based games are tough, right? Because they add another piece of work to the game development. So if you're going to write a story and make a game out of it, you're adding to your sort of like workload. So I think we found the most successful games in the past have been ones that have iterated through a compelling mechanic. So quite a quick play loop that then allowed for iteration and improvement and polish. The games that do well are games that have moved quickly enough through the production process to end up with a piece of work that is well crafted, responsive to the feedback, and very sort of polished. I know that's a really difficult thing to quantify because it's quite subjective, but I think thinking about a mechanic and emphasizing that in your early iteration is super important. The other thing I'd say is don't be precious about your ideas. The only way to have a good idea is to have lots of them. Your ideas will change. Bad games from this class are the ones where the teams have insisted on the same idea and have not listened to feedback from our guests or from us. So if you get feedback, think about it, and be prepared and flexible and fluid for your idea to change and evolve in response to feedback from people who have a lot more experience making games than you do or than I do.
And that actually ties into the next point, which is the realistic goals. You're going to get feedback that helps you manage the scope of your games. Usually what we want to see is, like, there's one neat idea that you're going to run with and just push to see how far it goes. We've seen a bunch where they try to bring in like 3 or 4 different ideas at the same time, and it's just they all interfere with each other and prevent you from making like one idea really shine. So this is the like do one thing well concept. We don't have the time to be able to establish like 3 or 4 different kinds of gameplay. So pick one that you think maybe takes a particular genre and subverts it in some really interesting way, and then show everybody what that would look like. And that would be impressive, regardless of whether you are like new to games or an expert in it. Organization. So again, you need to be able to say, I've got a goal that I need to meet in 2 weeks. How do I make sure that I structure like my team and my work to be able to meet that goal, right? And that's one of those things, like, again, sometimes you get good at that through experience, and you get experience by being bad at it. Right now, we're going to do what we can to try to help you get over some of those things to make sure that you meet your deadlines. And commitment. This is one of those things also. It's so hard. It's so easy to let other things get in the way, but this course requires you to have this goal and to just keep pushing as far as you can until you reach a good presentation deadline and you have to show what you got. One of the quotes we often hear is that games are never completed, they're just released. So what we need you to do is to just commit yourselves to making as much of a design push as you can. Try to get as much out to show our industry experts when you have the opportunity, and just never give up, right? And there's going to be a lot of times when people are going to tell you your game, like, there's sucks in 5 ways and it's good in 1. That's cool. It means they have one good thing that you can hold on to, right? And so just keep in mind, like, it's going to be tough, it's going to be frustrating, it's going to be a lot of work, but it's going to be really rewarding in the end, right? That's why we all do this. Yes. So we've seen a lot, and the reason why I point these things out is because we've seen a lot of games, a lot of groups go through our classes, and we know what things have plagued the ones that fall flat at the end. We're just trying to give you like a heads up of what kind of things have been the characteristics of all of the most successful groups. Right? Take it as you will. How to be a bad teammate. Again, we've seen this too. We've seen this a lot. At the end of the semester, we always have peer evaluations. And the peer evaluations are to help us figure out, if a game didn't come together, why would it not? And usually it can be attributed to, again, communication, organization. And so you just want to be all working together to the same goal, right? So making sure that you do your work, making sure that when the group is meeting, you need to be there so that everyone understands what they're supposed to do before you break off and do them. Making sure you communicate. If something's not going right, you don't wait until the meeting a week later to be able to tell people. Like, you let people know early enough to be able to do something about it. Getting in the way of your team members doing stuff. You would not believe what we have seen. And being a total jerk, again, you would not believe what we've seen. Just like know this, right? Know that everyone is capable of any of these things. And so, don't think that who you are right now and, who you perceive yourself to be makes you immune to this. Always be mindful of these things to make sure that you don't fall into any of these traps. This one I'm mostly going to hand off to Emma because she is far more of an expert on this than I am. But the only thing I'm going to mention is that what we've been aiming for over the past, 10 years that we've been collaborating is helping, like, we're steering people away from what you might consider like, the things that show up on the shelves at EB Games, and aiming more towards things like things that are more like the indie type titles. And the reason why we do this is because, again, like the novelty, the excitement of some really interesting ideas tends to be more in like the indie game area. But what does it mean to be an indie game, right? Does it mean that it's like the way the game feels and looks? Does it mean that it's done by an independent company? Does it mean that it's made by a small group, even if that small group is part of a large company? Does it mean that it's like done on the cheap because you can only make something small with a limited budget? What does it even mean, right? And some of you have never encountered the term before, so all this stuff is foreign to you. But for us, for the purposes of this course, we really want to see something novel and innovative. We want you to challenge us, not with another game that we've all seen before, but with something no one's ever thought of that's weird and wonderful, right? That's what we love to see, is something where it's like, oh, this is so cool, where people who have been seeing the same game over and over again look at it and say, that's pretty cool. I wonder how this game is going to work, right? So that's kind of where we start off with. Em, I think I'm gonna I'm gonna step back at this point. I said my.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. It's and thanks for the setup, because it's really a really interesting question. What is it about a game that makes it indie? It's become known as a sort of fairly wide bucket these days, and can speak to a whole range of different issues. I've got a couple of examples to just talk through some of the things that we have in mind when we talk about sort of indie games. So it may well be that we can typify indie game making as being quicker to make and more typically made by sort of smaller teams. But if you think about what that allows, it allows for more experimentation in form. So the game business really is sort of split into AAA and sort of indie frames. And a lot of AAA studios are so large and their games are so big, have such big budgets, that they're more comparable to Hollywood than they are to sort of indie sort of TV and film projects. And so I feel that dynamic in the industry is that a lot of the experimentation happens in these types of indie spaces. And certainly that's something that's become more successful, more financially lucrative than was the case sort of 15 years ago when we first started seeing indie titles come up. So old school titles like Fez were made by really sort of small teams of 2 or 3 people. So teams of people that are smaller than the teams you'll be working with. Now, of course, these folk had more experience in making games than you have necessarily, but it gave us a framing for talking about scope. So one of the common things about the indie space is actually, it's quite interesting. I'll see if I can find some links to sort of Toronto studios, because historically a lot of really amazing indie games have come out of this particular space. So until Ubisoft came into Toronto, the local game community was made up of sort of smaller groups of people working with much sort of shorter timescales. And I think that you can see examples of rebuilding and reworking existent genres in indie spaces. So are you going to be my slide controller, Steve? Could you take me to the next slide, please? Yeah, so Limbo is a really great example of an indie game. So Playdead several years ago got independent sort of funding in Denmark for the game and made this sort of like really lush experience, which did what it did really well. So in some ways, by sort of picking a particular sort of isometric sort of like view, more attention was able to be spent on the atmosphere of the game. So rather than building a sort of full 3D environment where you could freely roam wherever you wanted, the constraints that were picked with this particular game allowed for the game makers to focus in on the craft of the experience. So I hope that many of the people here in the audience have had chance to play Limbo, to have had the experience of shock jumps, of sort of like really sort of beautiful environments that make excellent work of particular visual styles and particular music styles. So one of the things I think you tend to see in a lot of indie titles is a lot of attention to the media that's used. So the game worlds are smaller, the play is simpler and more straightforward, but the level of craft can be seen in the other elements of the game. So for me, Limbo is a sort of wonderful example of what an indie title could be, and fits into a style of sort of like game noir. So film noir is a particular aesthetic that has been picked up by games in a range of sort of visual stylistic approaches, but here in this case helped reduce the costs on the production of the art, shifted a lot of the aesthetic into post-production and maybe more computational techniques, and allowed for the developers to finish this. I mean, it's not a particularly speedy game in terms of how long it took to develop, but it does show how compromises in one part of game production can be used to leverage a high quality of polish in other aspects of it. So next slide, please. So what we're sort of getting at here is one of the commonalities to indie games when we talk about them as stylistic pieces is this sort of sense of minimalism. And another, again, quite old example and local example is this beautiful game called Sword and Sorcery, which was released on iPad, nearly 11 years ago now. But Cappy worked with a small section of their programming team and some artists. So it was a really interesting development setup. The other thing I think which is fascinating about Sword and Sorcery is it was made for the iPad. So there were affordances of the gameplay that were very specific to the fact that you could spin the screen around and play both in landscape and also in portrait style. So here you've got an example of a sort of certain type of hail back to sort of old school game formats that set the expectation of the player to understand what she can do as she moves through this particular environment. And so I would sort of like fit this into like it's a game made by artists rather than necessarily developers per se, and that's why I call it an auteur game. So yes, there's a number of very sort of obvious sort of visual examples in terms of minimalism of what you can see on screen, but also the mechanics of the game were sort of quite simple and straightforward, and sort of like led the player through the experience. And I think that that's one of the things you can see with a lot of indies games is because they tend to be shorter experiences, they're often, not always, but often more accessible to a wider sort of type of player. If you think about types of people at the time who had iPads, they were more casual players than they were core players. So thinking about making your game as accessible to as wide a range of players as possible is an important part of why you're showing your game to the guests that come in to play test for you. Yeah, next slide, please. So these are other examples of sort of different creative approaches to indie spaces, and I would say sort of show a range of different types of scale. So I believe, you know, it's very easy for us to forget now or to think of Minecraft as an indie title, but it was and is probably one of the most financially successful indie titles, both sort of developing a whole new sort of genre of game and also a whole new type of audience and application. So I think about Minecraft as a toy really more than a game that allows for players to engage with it in a different way over a range of time. So that might be an interesting idea for everyone here, is how can you build a toy rather than a game that will allow for variance in the way that it's played. Johann Sebastian Joust is, again, probably something that's not feasible given our pandemic times now, but really was a party game. It was played at Hand-Eye Society's fancy video game party, I think a couple of years ago. I say a couple of years ago, I'm really old. A couple of years ago might mean like 8 years ago. But that's just what happens when you get to my age. But what was interesting about Johann Sebastian Joust is it sort of made use of a controller. So a controller was being used to show innovative gameplay. So one question about that might be, well, how can you take this sort of physical fun aspect of play, and how might that work in an online multi-user game space? And then the final example here is in 2016 or thereabouts, there was a move towards personal games, of which with a whole number of game makers like Anthropy and so forth, where it suddenly became possible to talk about games as expressing personal values. So historically, the game industry has been, oh, well, we want to get as many different types of players as possible, or looking for generalized choices that were of interest to a lot of different players. For me, the personal games movement was interesting because it let us talk about games as ways of representing lived experience or personal experience, and the acknowledgement that actually any made thing reflects the values of the maker. So what type of value do you want to build into your game? What do you want to express or communicate to your future player? Next slide, please. Okay, I'm very aware that we're close to the end of time now. So rather than me talk through this text, it's going to be on the recording, and I'm more than happy to take sort of direct questions on Discord later. I think there may be 2 more slides, Steve, if you just want to run through them for the recording. Oh yes, perhaps we can just rest here. I think it might be worth sharing these links in Discord directly, but I'd encourage all of you to look at prior games. So this itch link has a sort of collection of games from 2021. And prior to that, before we started using itch, we would use trailers from previous classes. You'll be asked to make a trailer of your game later on in the term. And you can see some selections of trailers from earlier games at this particular link. You're mute, Steve.
Sorry, I guess. Should we end with this one, or did you want to end with the previous one?
I'll copy and paste those links into Discord, so perhaps we can just wait here.
Okay.
Thanks.
So that's the course in a nutshell. I guess this is the point where we sort of point out, yeah, this is all of us. We are all here at your disposal because while we are associated with a particular campus and course, we're all kind of in this together. Mason, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because I saw Karthik in the chat, and yeah, I know that you'll introduce him tomorrow, but we also do have a TA that you will meet during the game jam during the entirety of the course, and he will be your guiding light for everything wrong with Unity, which will be a lot. So definitely seek to Karthik. He's incredible, and he'll be you'll meet him tomorrow, I believe. The CS people will.
And Karthik's been the TA for the past 2 years. This will be the 4th time he's TA'd the course. And one of the first things we do is to introduce you to Unity via the videos that Karthik recorded and posted onto YouTube. So it's kind of like the intro videos that we'll follow up on in our class tomorrow. And I guess just to make sure that all of us have a chance to say something, Brent, did you want to add some words of wisdom in, because you've also been connected to our collaborative course for many years. Is there anything that you'd want to add as our sort of industry person in residence for all the students out there today?
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, everything seems pretty well covered in the slides. I felt seen actually by communication being the top thing that came up because of ways that you can fail. because it's one of the things that I say is probably the #1 cause of games failing in the industry, regardless of whether they're like indie or not. It's such a problem in AAA. Yeah, so like keep communicating with each other, and be sort of treat everyone with respect, be civil, and kind of, you know, people aren't going to know things, and if you know something, help people out. It's the usual thing. But that's probably the best advice I can give right now.
Great. So again, the link to the game course information form, please fill that out so that we know more about you when it comes to forming groups next week. U of T folks, I'm going to see you tomorrow at 1, where we talk about some of the things that you're going to be required to do specifically. Otherwise, I mean, I think the major sentiment that we'd all like to express is just thanks all of you for coming out. And, you know, this is going to be a fun semester, and we're looking forward to mentoring you in another round of cool and innovative game designs.
And I'll just jump in to say, again, join the Discord if you haven't already. I'll send the link one more time, just right here. Again, put your first name and last name so we could cross-reference our list just to make sure that that's all sorted out. And lastly, we'll see you at the Game Jam on Saturday. Those that are in music and in CS. Yeah, introduce yourself, say hi, and kind of look around when you have a moment.
I guess, yeah, the only other thing, and then I'll let Emma say the last word. We're going to start soliciting game ideas from you starting basically right after the Game Jam. So just keep that in mind. If there's some idea that you think would be a good game, try to use the next week to figure out what that would be, so that when we send all of you the form to collect your ideas, you're ready to send that idea to us.
Yeah, and a bit more about the sort of selection process. So we solicit as many game ideas as you can give to us, and then we'll make a sub-selection of those. The person whose idea gets selected becomes the lead for that particular team. Now, the lead means that you have responsibility for making sure that your team's working properly and effectively and collaboratively, and that you're listening to the ideas and suggestions of the people that you're working with. You become a sort of like a project lead, which doesn't mean you get to say, this is my idea, it's best than anything, everybody else can be damned. It means that it's your job to make sure that you convince your teammates to find an effective way of working together and communicating. So yeah, so we'll select what we feel are the sort of strongest game ideas, and then those ideas will be developed, improved, and iterated on through the course of the collaboration as we sort of like move forward. So very rarely does the initial idea end up being the same at the end. So really more will become clear over the next sort of like couple of weeks in terms of sort of process and expectation and stuff. But as everybody's reiterated, the most important thing really is how well you communicate and how well you work together as a team. It's the most important thing.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And we're looking forward to working with all of you over the next few weeks.
Okay, have a great day, everyone.
Have a good day. Bye.